you read any of the 4 books that I read in the month of February? Yes, if you're craving a YA romantasy that actually feels fresh, thoughtfully written, and extremely well paced. If you love stories where choosing kindness is revolutionary, with themes of anti-war and anti-military industrial complex all woven throughout it in both a modern and a fantasy world that demonstrate casual and unquestioned acceptance of queerness and gender fluidity, all wrapped into this one beautiful Moth Dark package. I'll say no if you're not a big fan of like time traveling stories. The plot and especially the romance defy both the laws of space and time. There is a major plot point of time travel here, implications of the butterfly effect, and it's kind of left a little bit ambiguous. If that's not quite your jam, I would maybe pass on this one, but it comes highly recommended from me. Yes, if you want an example of a very poorly written YA romantasy. I think I've said most of my piece on Sibylline. It's just not a good book on so many fronts, even beyond the big glaring issue. I can't recommend it, in a world full of so many amazing books where unfortunately we can't read them all. Don't waste your time reading this one. If you want a good YA romantasy, read Moth Dark instead. Yes, if you want a contemporary romance that made me go like, oh wait, this is so much better than I was expecting. Not to say I was expecting it to be bad, but I love when my contemporary romances just go the next level. She's a social media influencer who's looking to kind of restart her life after leaving an abusive relationship that she's been in since high school, and she's hired by a local gym to basically be their social media manager. He works at this gym. He was going to be pro MMA, but after the death of his mother and his father running out on his younger siblings, he left that all behind to go home and raise them. First interaction, of course, isn't very cordial. He very much sees her as, a spoiled internet princess. Both of them have their own baggage that they're bringing into it. They each have their own flaws. And the main thing that stuck out to me is that while they're working through their issues, as much as they're leaning on each other, they're also leaning and learning more about themselves. I especially love the journey that our female main character goes on in this. If you're not a contemporary romance person, I guess, but also if you have some triggers around domestic violence, because it's so much of both of these characters' past, really, it is brought up quite a bit. Nothing brings me more joy than when I pick up a book being like, this will be a fun little romp, and then it becomes so much more. It's definitely one of my favorite contemporary romances that I've read in a long time. This one's coming out on March 31st. I'm going to do a full separate video for it closer to that date. Keep your eye out for this one. Yes, if you're a little bit morbidly curious and wanting to dive into some history surrounding rabies, starting in Greek mythology all the way up to like modern times, it was published in 2012. I kind of immediately finished it and was like, okay, well now I need to do my own personal deep dive into where rabies has come since then. I journaled a bunch of little fun facts about rabies. Also through the history bits, it made me thankful once again for modern medicine because, oh my God, some of these things these people came up with. It is very interesting that it is one of, if not the first, like zoonotic or animal transferred disease that you knew as animal transferred. There was no thought of it, being transferred via the air or anything. If you had a bite from a rabid animal, that's how you ended up with that illness. I would say no if you're looking for a book that's really more specifically about rabies and maybe a little bit about the science. Like the subtitle for this one is A Cultural History, and it definitely leans more on the cultural bit. I find it meanders at times around points that like don't really matter in the long run or aren't necessarily relevant to the rabies story. One prime example, there's a whole section on like vampires and werewolves, which was cool. But the section starts basically referencing this article that said that potentially rabies was inspiration for where some of these ideas came from. Then the authors of this book say, again, with that opening section, like, no, we don't think so because of these reasons. Then spend the rest of the section being like, so while we don't think it inspired it, here's some fun little things that are kind of like it. Again, I like hearing about vampires and werewolves, but in the grand scheme of things, it just felt very meandery, and I feel like a lot of it could have been skipped over for the grand thesis of rabies. Also, big no if you cannot deal with descriptions of animals being harmed and like some pretty grotesque descriptions, because this is not a pretty disease. The way they treat it and even the ways that they identify it, not pretty, no.